Something doesn't add up. Thanks for joining me as we continue to look at economics, current events, policy decisions, the kinds of things that affect everyday life. Hi, I'm Mo Cross. In our first video, we began deconstructing the headlines that are saying inflation is going down, but nothing is getting cheaper. What's happening is that things got more expensive, and now they're just continuing to rise at a slower pace. And for most people, that doesn't feel like relief. It just feels like nothing actually got cheaper. That's not confusion, that's math. So let's strip this down to the math, because that's where the confusion really starts. When you hear that inflation is easing, what they're actually talking about is something called disinflation. And disinflation has a very specific meaning. It does not mean prices are going down. It means prices are still going up, just at a slower rate. Let's walk through that with real numbers. Say something costs $100. If inflation is 9%, that means next year that item costs $109. Now, let's say inflation eases to 3%. That same item doesn't go back to 100. It goes from 109 to about 112. So even though inflation dropped from 9% to 3%, the price still went up. That's disinflation. The speed of increase slowed, but the direction never changed. Now compare that to deflation. Deflation is what people think they're hearing. Deflation means prices actually reverse. So that same item that went from 100 to 109 would then drop, maybe back down to 105, maybe even lower. That's a completely different mathematical outcome. One is still adding to the total. The other is subtracting from it. And that difference is everything, because mathematically, disinflation still compounds. Each new percentage increase is applied to a higher number, so even small increases continue to push the total upward over time. That's why people feel like prices never really go back. Under disinflation, they don't go back. They just rise more slowly. Now here's where it gets even more important. When inflation is high for multiple years in a row, those increases stack. In other words, if something goes up 10% one year, and then 5% the next year, and 3% after that, you're not looking at an 18% increase. You're looking at compounded growth on top of already higher numbers. That's how you end up 20%, sometimes 30% higher than where you started. And once you reach that level, slowing inflation doesn't undo the increase. It just slows how much higher it goes from there. When people hear inflation is easing, the math behind it is very clear. Prices are still increasing. They're just increasing less aggressively. But the total, the number you actually pay, and that's the disconnect. Mathematically, the system is behaving exactly as designed. But from a consumer perspective, there's no subtraction. There's only slower addition. And slower addition doesn't feel like relief. This isn't confusion. It's a measurement problem. And this is where it starts to hit a little harder, because inflation doesn't just happen once. It compounds. And this is where a lot of the frustration comes from. Even if inflation drops to zero, even if it completely stops, prices don't go back. They just stay where they are, at that higher level. When people hear inflation is under control, what that really means mathematically is that the numbers stopped climbing as fast, but it didn't come down. And over time, that creates a kind of weight, because every increase that happened before is still there, still part of the system, and people feel that not as a percentage, but as a constant pressure. They remember where things started, and they can see where things ended up. And that compounded gap is what they're living inside of now. See you in the next video where we discuss the big one, high velocity expenses like food, housing, and energy. Something doesn't add up. I invite you to join me if you want to keep going. Bring along a friend, share the knowledge. Please like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.